yelled during the wedding I paid for, his face twisted in fury. I simply grinned, concealing the sting of deceit, and answered, "I'll go, but first say hello to my special visitor, your former pal." When he spotted who it was, his eyes bulged in terror and he collapsed. The payback of righteousness was only getting started. Before we go on, please hit subscribe on the channel and drop a comment with the current time and your location. The door banged shut so forcefully that the photo frames shook on my living room wall. "Dad, I'm tying the knot." Judy stormed in through the doorway, out of breath and red-faced, shoving her left hand at me like a challenge. The diamond sparkled under the lamp's glow, scattering small rainbows over her features. I placed my coffee mug aside, the evening broadcast still droning from the TV. "Congrats, honey." When did Gary pop the question? Last evening at that Italian spot in the city center. Her tone had a biting sharpness, on guard before I'd said a word. She yanked off her jacket with abrupt jerks, tossing it across my armchair. "I know what's on your mind." "What is on my mind?" "That he's not worthy. That I'm hurrying things. That I ought to hold off, learn more about him. Yada yada yada." She strode to the window, then whirled around to confront me. "Well, I'm 28, Dad. I can handle my own choices." I examined her expression, the forced grin, the way her fingers fidgeted with the ring. In 4 decades of property transactions, I'd mastered reading folks. The quickest talkers often hid the most. "Have you picked a date?" "June 15th. That leaves us 2 months to organize it all." She headed to the sofa, sitting on the arm as if ready to dash off any second. "Gary desires something refined, sophisticated, the sort of event that sends a message. 2 months is quite rushed, for we don't want to delay." The phrase burst from her. "Why bother? When it's right, yeah? That's what you always claimed about Mom." The analogy hurt because it wasn't true. Your mom and I courted for 3 years before the proposal, but mentioning that would just fuel Judy's temper. "Where do you plan to hold it?" "The Fairmont." "Gary knows people there." She adjusted her skirt, dodging my gaze. "It'll be stunning. Around 200 attendees. 200 attendees at the Fairmont." I ran some fast calculations in my head and disliked the outcome. "That sounds pricey. It'll run about 50,000, perhaps 60. She finally met my eyes, chin lifted defiantly. "I realize it's steep, but this is my big day, Dad. My only one. I want it flawless." There it was. The true motive behind the theatrical arrival, the guarded stance, the hasty schedule. Gary craved a lavish ceremony, and Judy expected me to foot the bill. $50,000. You vowed to assist when I wed. You swore to Mom before she passed that you'd provide me a fitting celebration." Her voice wavered a bit. "Don't say you're reneging on that vow now." She was correct. I had assured Helen that. But Helen would have taken time to assess Gary, probing with inquiries, ensuring he deserved our girl. Helen would have pierced his facade in roughly 5 minutes. "Of course, I'll contribute to the wedding." The response slipped out before I could halt it. "But perhaps we can talk about the costs." "Thanks." She leaped up and pecked my cheek. Her demeanor flipped so fast it disoriented me. "Gary will be thrilled. He's been stressing over the finances, pondering how to swing it with his startup funds." Another warning sign. What sort of guy asks for a woman's hand when he can't cover the marriage? Maybe I should invite Gary to dinner. Get acquainted with my soon-to-be son-in-law more. That'd be wonderful. He's eager to discuss his venture concepts with you. He truly admires accomplished business people like you." She collected her jacket, abruptly keen to depart. "I need to go share the great news about the wedding funds." She reached the door before I could rise. "Judy, hold on." "Love you, Dad. Thanks for getting it." The door shut with a gentle snap, leaving me solitary with the TV's noise and the resonance of her statements. I gazed at the shut door for an extended time. The home felt overly silent, overly vacant. $50,000 for a ceremony to a guy I scarcely knew. For a daughter who'd turned into someone unfamiliar. I switched off the TV and took my coffee mug to the kitchen. The place seemed altered after Judy's stormy drop-in, loaded with unvoiced strains and incomplete dialogues. I washed the mug in the sink, performing my nightly ritual, while my brain replayed each phrase, each protective motion. The kitchen retained a subtle aroma of the casserole I'd warmed for supper, Helen's formula, though I'd never perfected her spice method. I cleaned the surfaces, aligned the dishcloth, anything to occupy my hands as my ideas swirled. $50,000. The figure kept returning, pointed and insistent. I wandered to my office, pulled by an unnamed urge. The space contained 2 decades of built-up existence, dusty business honors, photo collections Helen had arranged with strict order, tax documents sorted neatly by year. I retrieved one album from the rack, its leather cover worn smooth by time. The pictures narrated a tale unlike this evening's exchange. There was Judy at 5, toothless and chuckling on my shoulders at Navy Pier, at 10, beaming over her science fair volcano exhibit. High school commencement, tears flowing as she embraced us both. College dorm setup day, attempting to seem self-reliant while inwardly scared. When had she grown so fragile, so prompt to presume my disapproval? Perhaps I did disapprove. Gary Thompson had entered our world 6 months back with his pricey outfits and fuzzy chatter about groundbreaking tech. He tossed around names of investors I'd never encountered and spouted jargon that signified zilch. But Judy's gaze sparkled when he spoke, as if she beheld brilliance rather than a show. I turned to Helen's cherished snapshot of us three from Judy's university ceremony. We appeared so whole then, so assured of what lay ahead. Helen had been absent for 2 years, yet her void still ambushed me at times. She would have managed this evening's talk expertly. Helen could pose tough queries without sparking Judy's barriers. The vacant home enveloped me, heavy with the burden of discussions Helen and I would never share, choices I'd face solo. Raising kids didn't stop at 18, if anything it intensified. At least with young Judy I could shield her from scraped knees and schoolyard tormentors. How do you guard an adult daughter from her own decisions? My phone vibrated with a text. Judy, Gary suggests dinner tomorrow at 7, Angelo's on Rush Street. I eyed the note for a while before replying, looking forward to it. Maybe I was judging harshly. Maybe my guardian impulses were fogging my view. Gary could be precisely as he appeared, a budding innovator smitten with my daughter, the costly event, the least allure, the manner he materialized when cash was mentioned. Perhaps those were flukes. I shut the album and slid it back onto the shelf. Tomorrow evening I'd grant Gary Thompson a fair shot. I'd inquire about his enterprise, his future goals, his aims with Judy. I'd act the father-in-law he anticipated, not the wary tycoon I'd evolved into. The hall's grandfather clock struck 10:30. Bedtime, though I suspected rest would evade me. I extinguished the office lights and climbed the stairs, already plotting discussion points for the next night's meal. Mutual interests, shared hobbies, the foundation for forging bonds. If Gary was joining the family, I'd discover a path to harmony. I paused before my bedroom mirror, tweaking my tie for the third go. The deep blue silk was Helen's top pick. She'd presented it for our 20th milestone, saying it highlighted my eyes. This night seemed significant enough for Helen's tie, significant enough for the fine cufflinks and the scent I reserved for key events. 7:15. I'd aimed to show up right on schedule, not prematurely to look eager, not tardily to seem aloof. Angelo's on Rush Street was Gary's selection, a high-end Italian venue that likely charged more for a single dinner than my old weekly grocery bill. But if this was Gary's tactic to wow me, I'd go with it. I inspected my wallet. Cards, bills, professional cards if talk veered to work. My phone displayed no fresh notes from Judy since the prior day's meal confirmation. No 11th-hour shifts, no fretful messages urging me to behave with Gary. Perhaps she believed it'd go smoothly. Perhaps she was just sure Gary could manage. The trip downtown would consume 30 minutes in rush hour flow. I snatched my keys and made for the garage, mentally practicing openers. Inquire about his venture. Not the hazy groundbreaking tech babble, but details. Income sources, customer base, expansion forecasts, the queries that exposed if someone grasped their own operation. Sports could be less risky turf. The Cubs showed promise in spring drills. The Bulls were restructuring once more, neutral subjects avoiding personal digs or career probes. Though Gary seemed the golf chat sort, pricey links, elite groups, the networking over 18 holes. I reversed from the driveway, observing the twilight glow through the oaks bordering my road. April in Chicago signified optimism. Winter yielding at last, the hint of heat to come. Maybe that's what this night symbolized too. Fresh starts, family growth, life's inevitable advance I'd been opposing. Helen would have adored orchestrating a wedding. She'd have exasperated Judy with tastings and floral picks, but in the finest sense. She'd have connected with Gary, pulling him into our fold with her knack for warmth. I wasn't Helen, but I could emulate her style tonight. Traffic flowed steadily on the Eisenhower. I'd budgeted extra minutes, so getting there a tad early wouldn't matter. It could even let me watch Gary's dealings with the staff. A guy's treatment of servers revealed his true nature. My phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I sent it to voicemail, staying attentive to the drive and the impending chat. This evening was for forging links, discovering ties with the guy set to wed my daughter. Any work call could hold. The Chicago horizon unfolded as I neared the center, glass spires mirroring the fading sun. This was Gary's realm. Costly eateries, city polish, the existence tied to wealth and drive. Maybe that's what drew Judy. After suburban Oak Park's leafy ease, the urban buzz likely seemed thrilling, brimming with potential. I secured parking 2 blocks from Angelo's and gave my look a final check in the mirror. Silver hair tidy, tie-aligned, coat crisp. I appeared as I was. A prosperous executive dining with his prospective son-in-law. Professional yet approachable. Engaged but not prying. The night breeze bore early spring's fragrance as I strolled to the spot. In 2 hours, I'd discern if Gary Thompson merited my daughter's affection and my monetary backing. This night would establish the vibe for our future ties. Time to learn what sort of fellow aimed to enter our clan. Angelo's hostess led me past the primary dining space to a secluded section at the rear. Crystal fixtures shed cozy illumination on white linens, and the gentle hum of talk fostered an air of lavish elegance. I squared my shoulders, prepared for the commitment this night demanded. The private room featured a table for 8, mostly filled save 1 vacant seat. Gary rose as I neared, but his grin stayed cold in his eyes. Here's our kind benefactor," he declared to the group, his tone loud enough for all to catch. The others, Gary's sibling, 2 work colleagues, and an unfamiliar older pair, fidgeted awkwardly. Judy gave Gary a cautionary glance, but he brushed it off entirely. "Gary?" I offered my hand, resolved to begin anew. "Thanks for setting up this meal." He clasped my hand a bit too tightly. "Naturally, particularly with such ample funds for wedding costs." I claimed my chair, observing how Gary had claimed the table's head as if presiding instead of participating. The server decanted wine as I assessed the faces present. Gary's sister appeared mortified. His colleagues seemed adept at overlooking his antics. "So, Alton," Gary pressed on, lounging back with evident contentment. "Judy says you're retired. Must be great having all that leisure. I keep occupied." I maintained an even business-like tone. "What about your enterprises? Judy noted you're developing something cutting-edge. Multiple initiatives, in fact. You wouldn't grasp the tech." He dismissed with a flick. "It demands a forward mindset your era finds tough." Judy stretched across to Gary. He didn't intend I intended precisely that. Gary's focus remained on me. Some folks cling to outdated views. Property, conventional assets, secure but dull. The older duo swapped looks. Gary's sister fixated on her greens, obviously yearning to escape. "Traditional methods have value," I responded measuredly. "Reliability, established histories, real income flows." "Income flows?" Gary chuckled, devoid of mirth. "How utterly expected. Tell me, did you ever chase genuine risks in your trade or just trade properties like the masses?" Warmth rose in my neck, but I held steady. All ventures carry measured gambles. The trick is spotting chance from guesswork. Voiced like a real traditionalist, Gary lifted his glass in fake toast. No surprise, Judy sought someone with true foresight for her path. Judy's cheeks burned. "Gary, please. This should be festive." "It is festive." We're toasting Judy's break from narrow views. He reclined, plainly relishing it, though I guess we ought to appreciate the monetary aid even if paired with obsolete guidance. My jaw clenched, but I kept my words calm. "I'm here for Judy's joy. I hope we can discover shared territory." "Shared territory?" Gary echoed it like it soured. "You mean where you endorse my decisions and I feign regard for yours?" The server brought entrees, offering brief relief. But Gary persisted. He sliced his steak with dramatic flair, the blade grating on the dish. "Actually, Alton, I've pondered our family setup ahead. Some limits could be essential." Gary's glass was half drained by main course time. The booze had eroded any control he'd held, and his gaze had a hunter's shine that chilled me. "You know what? I figured out tonight," Gary proclaimed, volume-drawing eyes from adjacent tables. "Family meals succeed when all know their spot." Judy's utensil halted midair. "Gary, perhaps we should." "No, allow me to complete." He raised his palm like leading a symphony. "Your dad appears muddled on his part in our forthcoming union." I laid my knife down deliberately, sensing the calm before crucial deals. "I'm unclear on that." "Oh, I believe you are." Gary leaned in, his whisper conspiratorial yet more menacing than yells. "See, we must clear up something on the wedding." The group hushed. Even Gary's typically talkative sister ceased, detecting the mood change. Gary sat tall, voice booming again. "Listen, old-timer, you're not welcome at the wedding. The statement struck like a strike. Around us, gasps, utensils dropped hastily. That's outrageous. Judy's tone broke with dismay and ire. Gary, you can't simply, yes, I can. Gary's glee was evident. It's our event, Judy. We choose who fits and who doesn't. Gary, stop this right now. Judy's hands shook as she reached toward him. This is my father we're talking about. Yes, your father, who's been questioning my every move since the moment we met. Gary turned back to me, his smile razor sharp. Judy, your father is ruining our evening again. I stared at him across the table, processing the calculated cruelty of the moment. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a planned humiliation performed in front of witnesses to establish dominance. The other guests sat frozen, eyes averted like they were witnessing a car accident. Gary's sister had her hand pressed to her mouth. One of his business associates was studying his wine glass with intense fascination. EC. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with deliberate precision. Thank you for clarifying the situation. Dad, please don't. Judy started to stand, but Gary's hand on her wrist stopped her. Let him go, sweetheart. Some people can't handle honest communication. I stood slowly, my movements controlled despite the rage building in my chest. 40 years of business meetings had taught me when to fight and when to withdraw strategically. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. Judy, I looked directly at my daughter, ignoring Gary completely. I love you. That will never change. Daddy, please, we can work this out. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't pull away from Gary's grip. Call me when you're ready to talk. Really talk. I reached for my wallet, but Gary waved dismissively. Don't worry about the check, Alton, I've got it covered. Of course he did, with my money filtered through Judy's account. They walked toward the exit with measured steps, nodding politely to the hostess, maintaining the dignity Gary had tried to strip away. Behind me, I heard Judy's voice rising in argument. Gary's responses growing more defensive. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto Rush Street. The city hummed around me. Traffic, distant music, the laughter of people enjoying their Friday evening. Normal people with normal problems. I retrieved my car from the valet, tipped appropriately, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. Gary Thompson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The steering wheel felt solid under my grip as I pulled away from their restaurant. Traffic moved slowly through downtown Chicago, giving me time to process what had just happened. Red lights became opportunities to replay Gary's words, to analyze the calculated cruelty behind his public humiliation. My phone buzzed with a call. Judy's name appeared on the display, but I let it ring through to voicemail. We both needed time to process this evening before any meaningful conversation could happen. The city streamed past my windows, glass towers reflecting streetlights, pedestrians hurrying toward their Friday night destinations. The ordinary rhythm of urban life continuing, while my world had fundamentally shifted. I'd walked into that restaurant believing diplomacy could bridge any gap. I'd left knowing that Gary Thompson was something more dangerous than a mere opportunist. At North Lake Lakeshore Drive, I made an impulsive turn toward the waterfront, instead of heading straight home to Oak Park. The familiar route to Montrose Harbor called to me, a place Helen and I used to visit when we needed to think through difficult decisions. I parked facing Lake Michigan, the dark waters stretching toward an invisible horizon. Chicago's skyline rose behind me, but ahead lay nothing but darkness and the distant sound of waves against the breakwater. This was where I came when business deals went wrong, when difficult choices needed to be made. Gary's behavior tonight hadn't been about wedding guest lists or family dynamics. It had been a display of power, a public demonstration that he controlled Judy completely. The way he'd gripped her wrist, the satisfaction in his voice when she defended him despite his cruelty. These weren't the actions of a man in love. I'd spent 40 years reading people across conference tables. The desperate ones talked too much. The dishonest ones deflected questions with aggression. The truly dangerous ones enjoyed causing pain. Gary Thompson enjoyed causing pain. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked the voicemail from Judy's earlier call. Dad, I'm so sorry. Gary had too much wine and he stressed about the wedding expenses. He didn't mean what he said. Please call me back. We need to fix this. She was making excuses for him, already rewriting tonight's events to make Gary the victim of circumstances, rather than the architect of deliberation cruelty. I'd seen this pattern in business. People so invested in bad decisions they'd rationalize anything to avoid admitting their mistake. But this wasn't business. This was my daughter's life. I stared out at the lake, remembering Helen's advice during our own parenting challenges. Sometimes protecting them means letting them make mistakes, but sometimes it means stepping in, even when they hate you for it. The question was, which situation was this? Gary's defensive aggression suggested someone with secrets worth protecting. His vague business descriptions, his expensive lifestyle with no visible income, his immediate hostility toward anyone asking questions. These weren't the patterns of legitimate success. I started the engine and pulled back onto Lakeshore Drive, heading toward Oak Park with new purpose. Protecting Judy might require methods that went beyond fatherly concern. It might require the same investigation skills that had made me successful in real estate. The ability to research, to ask the right questions, to uncover what people preferred to keep hidden. By the time I reached my driveway, the decision was made. I wouldn't wait for Gary to destroy my daughter's life from within. I wouldn't hope that love would somehow overcome obvious warning signs. Starting tomorrow, I'd find out exactly who Gary Thompson really was. The lakefront wedding venue sparkled under the afternoon sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan's endless blue expanse. White flowers cascaded from every available surface. An A-string quartet played softly near the dance floor, where Judy moved like a vision in her flowing gown. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, completely unaware of the storm approaching her perfect day. I adjusted my tie and stepped through the entrance, noting the layout with a businessman's eye for tactical advantage. The reception hall stretched along the waterfront with multiple exits and clear sight lines, perfect for what was coming. It had been a long night after leaving the lake last evening. I'd spent hours working my network of contacts, following paper trails, and making strategic phone calls, 23 calls to be exact. The 24th had connected me with Curtis Blackwell, and everything had fallen into place with the precision of a well-executed deal. Gary held court near the bar, gesturing grandly with a champagne flute, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word about disruptive technologies and revolutionary market approaches. His expensive tuxedo fit perfectly, probably paid for with someone else's money. The confident smile, the casual way he accepted congratulations, he truly believed he'd won yesterday's confrontation. I positioned myself at the back of the venue, near the service entrance Curtis would use when he arrived. From here I could observe everything while remaining inconspicuous. The irony wasn't lost on me, standing in the shadows at my own daughter's wedding, waiting to destroy her husband's life. Wedding guests mingled with the casual elegance money could buy. I recognized some faces from Gary's dinner party, others from Judy's college years. They laughed in clink glasses, celebrating what they believed was a love story. None of them suspected they were attending the final act of an elaborate fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from Curtis. Parking now. Legal papers ready. Give me 5 minutes. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Curtis would enter during the height of celebration when Gary felt most secure and had the largest audience. Public humiliation served justice better than private confrontation. Gary had chosen to embarrass me in front of witnesses. Now he'd discover how it felt to be exposed when it mattered most. Judy spun across the dance floor, her dress flowing like water, her smile bright enough to power the venue's chandeliers. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was her wedding day, the moment she'd dreamed about since childhood. Was he about to destroy her happiness to satisfy my need for justice? Then I remembered Gary's words from last night. Your father is ruining our evening. The calculating cruelty, the public dismissal, the way he'd gripped Judy's wrist when she tried to defend me. This wasn't about my wounded pride. It was about protecting my daughter from a predator who saw her as a means to an end. Gary's laughter carried across the room as he told some story to his captive audience. He gestured toward the lake, probably taking credit for choosing such an expensive venue. Everything about him was performance, from his practiced charm to his borrowed confidence. The string quartet transitioned into something lighter, more celebratory. Guests gathered around the newlyweds for photographs, smartphones capturing what they thought was pure joy. In a few minutes, those Sesame phones would be recording something entirely different. I checked my watch. Curtis should be walking through the entrance any moment. Gary continued his performance, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present, in spectacular fashion. Across the room, Gary's gaze swept the crowd, basking in the attention, reveling in his temporary triumph. Then his eyes found mine. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. The confident smile flickered and died. Gary's face transformed from celebration to fury in the space of a heartbeat. He thrust his champagne glass at the nearest guest and began cutting through the crowd with predatory focus, his expensive tuxedo making him look like a shark in formal wear. Conversation stopped as he pushed past dancing couples and chattering groups. The string quartet played on, but the wedding atmosphere shifted as guests sensed impending confrontation. Judy looked up from her photographs, confusion clouding her radiant features. "What are you doing here?" Gary's voice boomed across the reception hall, cutting through music and laughter like a blade. "You weren't invited yesterday." The words echoed off the glass walls, carrying to every corner of the venue. The string quartet faltered into silence. Guests turned toward us with expressions ranging from shock to fascination, smartphones instinctively rising to capture whatever drama was unfolding. I remained calm, hands clasped behind my back, watching Gary's public meltdown with professional detachment. This was exactly what I'd hoped for, his arrogance on full display for everyone to witness. "Gary, please." Judy started toward us, her wedding dress rustling urgently. "No." He held up a trembling hand, alcohol and rage making his voice crack. "This man disrespected me, disrespected our relationship, and now he shows up uninvited to ruin our wedding. I'm leaving," I said quietly, my voice carrying despite its controlled volume. "But first, let me introduce you to my special guest." I gestured toward the entrance where Curtis Blackwell had just appeared with perfect timing. "I believe you know your old friend." Curtis Blackwell commanded attention the moment he entered. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed serious money. He carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. His briefcase looked expensive and official. Gary's aggressive posture crumbled as recognition dawned. His face went white, then gray, all color draining away like water from a broken basin. "Gary Thompson." Curtis's voice carried the crisp authority of courtrooms and corporate takeovers. "I finally found you." Wedding guests murmured in confusion, sensing something significant but unable to understand what they were witnessing. Gary stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. Curtis approached with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the suddenly quiet reception hall. He opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. "Gary Thompson, you are hereby served with legal papers, demanding repayment of $1,200,000 plus accumulated interest and legal fees, which you fraudulently obtained from Blackwell Venture Capital under false pretenses." The words fell like hammer blows. Gary's hands shook as Curtis pressed the papers into them, but he seemed unable to process what was happening. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time in front of everyone who mattered to his new life. Judy gasped, her bouquet falling from nerveless fingers. "1 million, Gary, what is he talking about?" Wedding guests pressed closer, no longer pretending polite disinterest. Cell phones captured every moment as Gary stared at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language. 2 years, Curtis continued, his voice carrying throughout the silent hall. 2 years I've been looking for you. Mr. Thompson, you disappeared with my money, left a trail of forged documents, and thought you could reinvent yourself with someone else's daughter. Gary's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the papers with white knuckles, his wedding day confidence evaporating like morning mist. The man who'd humiliated me less than 24 hours ago now looked like a cornered animal. "Gary," Judy's voice cracked with growing horror. "Is this true? Did you steal money?" But Gary couldn't answer. He stood paralyzed, holding proof of his crimes while his new bride and her wedding guests watched, his careful facade crumble into dust. Gary's hands trembled as he read the court summons, his eyes darting across the legal language that spelled out his financial ruin. The elegant wedding venue had become a courtroom with 150 guests serving as jury to witness his complete destruction. "200,000 plus interest," he whispered, the numbers seeming to physically wound him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the lakefront breeze flowing through the open windows. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume, a prop in a performance that had finally been exposed. Wedding guests pushed closer, their celebration forgotten in favor of the unfolding drama. Smartphones recorded every moment of Gary's breakdown, capturing his transformation from confident groom to exposed criminal. The string quartet stood frozen with their instruments, unsure whether to continue playing for a party that no longer existed. Curtis observed Gary's reaction with professional satisfaction. "Alton, thank you. he said, extending his hand toward me. I've been searching for this man for 2 years. Your business contacts proved invaluable in tracking him down. Justice needed to be served, I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words carried weight in the silent reception hall, explaining everything and nothing to the confused wedding guests. Judy stood paralyzed in her wedding gown, bouquets scattered at her feet like broken dreams. Gary, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal money from people. But Gary couldn't speak. The court papers shook in his grip as he read details of forged documents, phantom companies, and elaborate schemes that had funded his lavish lifestyle. Every expensive dinner, every designer suit, every romantic gesture, all paid for with stolen money. The wedding, Judy whispered, realization dawning in her voice. The venue, the flowers, my dress, where did the money come from? Gary's silence answered everything. His carefully constructed identity was disintegrating in real time, leaving behind only the truth of what he really was. A common thief who'd used my daughter's love as cover for his criminal activities. Curtis closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to respond to this summon. I suggest you find a good attorney. He turned to me with genuine gratitude. Thank you again, Elton. The authorities will want to speak with you about how you located him. The wedding reception had completely collapsed around us. Guests gathered in shock clusters, whispers and pointed fingers replacing celebration and congratulations. The elegant lakefront venue with its panoramic views and perfect flowers had become the scene of public humiliation and criminal exposure. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful in her wedding dress, but now understanding that her marriage was built on lies and stolen money. The pain in her eyes cut deep, but beneath it I saw the first glimmers of recognition. Her father hadn't been trying to control her life, but to protect it. Judy, I said softly, crossing to where she stood, frozen among the scattered flowers. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and confusion. You knew what he was. I suspected. I investigated. I found Curtis. I touched her shoulder gently. Sometimes protecting the people we love means doing things they don't understand until later. Gary finally found his voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. Judy, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back. With what money? Curtis interrupted coldly. You have no legitimate business, no real income, no assets except what you've stolen from others. The truth hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Gary's empire of lies had collapsed in less than 10 minutes, leaving nothing but legal papers and broken promises. Curtis and I walked toward the exit together. Our business concluded behind us. The elegant wedding reception continued its transformation into something resembling a crime scene, complete with witnesses and evidence. Justice had been served with perfect timing and devastating effectiveness. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken before. Oak Park's familiar tree-lined street seemed more peaceful, more settled, as if the neighborhood itself knew justice had been served. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, reviewing the afternoon's events with the satisfaction of a businessman who just closed the most important deal of his career. Inside my house, Thieselance felt productive rather than empty. I went straight to my home office where wedding contracts and financial documents waited in neat stacks on my desk. Helen had always admired my organizational systems. Everything filed, labeled, easily accessible formaments exactly like this. My first call went to First National's private banking line where Margaret Henderson had handled my accounts for 15 years. Mr. Stewart, how can I assist you today? Margaret, I need to stop a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow. $50,000 to Fairmont Catering Services. Of course, may I have the reference number? I read the confirmation number from my notes, listening to her keyboard clicks as she located the transaction. Found it. This was scheduled as final payment for wedding services. Shall I cancel the entire transfer? Yes. The contracts have been voided due to fraud discovery. I'll handle that immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 24 hours. The efficiency felt satisfying. No questions, no judgment, just professional service handling legitimate business needs. Next came the vendor call, systematic, methodical, each conversation documented with the precision I'd used throughout my real estate career. The florist answered first. Stewart Thompson wedding. Oh my, we heard the reception ended quite abruptly. Is everything all right? The contracts are void due to fraud discovery. I'm stopping all payments effective immediately. Her tone shifted to business mode. I see. Well, the flowers were delivered and displayed. We'll need to discuss partial payment for services rendered. Send me an itemized invoice. Address collection efforts to Gary Thompson. Each call followed the same pattern. The caterer expressed concern about the reception ending early. The band wanted to know about final payment for their 3-hour performance. The photographer asked about delivery of wedding photos. To each, I gave the same professional response. Fraud discovered, contracts void. Pursue Gary Thompson for payment. By 7, I'd completed 9 calls and stopped 6 different payment authorizations. The total financial impact would hit Gary and Judy with approximately $38,000 in immediate vendor bills, money that would have to come from somewhere other than my accounts. I felt a brief pang of concern for Judy. She'd wake up tomorrow facing financial realities she'd never experienced. Bills that her fraudulent husband couldn't pay with stolen money. But sometimes protecting people required letting them feel the consequences of their choices. My phone rang as he organized the final confirmation documents. Caller ID Judy. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then let it ring through to voicemail. She needed time to understand what Gary really was before we could have any productive conversation. Tonight she was probably still angry at me for ruining her wedding. Tomorrow she might begin understanding that I'd saved her from something much worse. The phone rang again before I'd finished filing the banking confirmations. Judy's name appeared on the screen, disappeared when I didn't answer, then appeared again 3 minutes later. I moved to the kitchen and started preparing a simple dinner. Grilled chicken breast, steamed vegetables, brown rice, normal, methodical, peaceful. The phone rang twice more while I seasoned the chicken. In the living room, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the evening news. Chicago's mayor was discussing infrastructure improvements. The Cubs had won their home opener. Spring weather would continue through the week. The phone rang during the sports segment. Judy again. I sipped my tea and listened to the weather forecast, trying to remember if I'd planned any weekend projects that might be affected by potential rain. The garden needed attention, but that could wait until after this family crisis resolved itself. 15 minutes later, another call, then another. The pattern became predictable. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Judy's name would light up the screen. I found myself counting. Call 7 during the national news. Call 8 during commercial break. Call 9 when the local anchor returned. By 8:30, the count had reached 18. I switched to a documentary about Antarctic wildlife, finding the penguin colonies more peaceful than the drama playing out through my phone. Even the harsh realities of survival in nature seemed simpler than human relationships. Call 23 came during footage of leopard seals hunting. Call 24 interrupted information about ice shelf formations. I refilled my tea and adjusted my reading glasses, settling in for what promised to be a long evening. The documentary ended at 9:15, call count 31. I channel surfed briefly, settling on a British mystery series Helen had enjoyed. The detective was questioning suspects in a country manner, each person hiding secrets that would eventually surface. Art imitating life with better dialogue and more civilized settings. Between 9:15 and 10, 12 more calls came through. The desperation was palpable even without answering. Shorter intervals between attempts, the phone barely silent before ringing again. Call 44 arrived at 10:07. I turned off the television and began my evening routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities for Judy to understand why her father had acted with such apparent cruelty. Tonight she was learning that actions had consequences, that fraudulent husbands came with unexpected costs, that independence required more than just declaring it. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth while the phone remained blessedly silent for almost 8 minutes. Call 45 interrupted me while I was changing into pajamas. By the time I turned off the lights and settled into bed, Judy had called 44 times in 3 hours. I switched the phone to silent mode and placed it face down on the nightstand. She would need to solve this crisis herself without her father's financial rescue. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent could do was refuse to answer the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Cook County Courthouse watching Gary Thompson receive his sentence. The man who'd confidently humiliated me at dinner now looked 20 years older, his expensive suits replaced by county jail orange, his arrogant demeanor crushed by the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant will serve 18 months in state prison and pay full restitution of $400,000 to the victims identified in this case, Judge Martinez announced with professional finality. Curtis leaned over from the bench beside me. 14 victims total. The investigation uncovered much more than just my case. Gary had built an entire criminal enterprise on charm and borrowed credibility, investment schemes, fake partnerships, forged documents. The scope of his fraud made my daughter's narrow escape seem even more fortunate. Outside the courthouse, Curtis shook my hand with genuine gratitude. I never would have found him without your business connections, Alton. Thank you for calling me that night. Justice needed to be served, I replied. The same words I'd used at Judy's wedding. They still felt appropriate. Curtis walked toward his car, briefcase full of restitution paperwork that would eventually recover most of his stolen money. I stood on the courthouse steps watching Chicago's afternoon traffic flow past, wondering if my daughter was ready to rebuild our relationship. That evening I finally called her. Dad. Her voice sounded different, older, more cautious, but without the defensive anger I'd expected. Hello, sweetheart. I thought it was time we talked. I've been waiting for you to call. A pause. I learned about the other victims. 14 people, Dad. Gary stole money from 14 different people. I know, I attended his sentencing today. You were there? Another pause, longer this time. I should have been there too, but I couldn't face seeing him again. You don't need to face him ever again. The vendors have been calling constantly. The bills, the canceled payments. I understand now what you did and why. Her voice caught slightly. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your concerns about Gary. Come home for dinner tomorrow, I said. We have a lot to discuss. The next evening, Judy arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of practical business clothes that suggested she was taking her career more seriously. She looked tired but stronger, like someone who'd survived a test and learned important lessons. You saved me from becoming victim number 15, she said as we sat down to dinner. I protected my daughter. That's what fathers do. Even when their daughters are too stubborn to appreciate it. She raised her wine glass to wisdom gained through hardship. We talked until nearly midnight about trust, independence, financial responsibility, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling their mistakes. Judy had spent 3 weeks discovering what life was like without her father's safety net, and the experience had taught her more about self-reliance than any lecture could have managed. I'm going to pay you back, she said as we cleared the dinner plates. Every dollar from the vendors, from the wedding expenses, everything. It might take a while, but I'll pay it all back. Keep your money, I told her. Consider it tuition for one of life's most important lessons. She hugged me then. Really hugged me. For the first time since before she'd met Gary Thompson. Justice had been served. Family bonds had been tested and strengthened. And my daughter had emerged wiser, more independent, and finally safe from the charming predator who'd almost destroyed her life. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.